She walked slowly through the long metallic corridor, her steps echoing softly against the walls of the human base. To her people, this place was nothing more than a cage, a place of exile for one who had failed. She was a young and beautiful alien woman, trained as a warrior, raised to look down on weaker species, and yet now she found herself here, living among humans. Her punishment was not a chain or a cell, but something far more humiliating. She was to stay with them, watch them, learn from them, and above all, live as if she were one of them. The thought of it still burned inside her chest. Among her kind, humans were considered fragile, creatures of flesh and bone that broke easily. They had no scales, no natural armor, no enhanced strength like her people. They relied on tools and machines, things her people mocked as crutches. And yet here she was, forced to breathe the same air as them, to walk through their halls, to eat their food, and to live inside their strange, simple structures. Her sharp eyes scanned the walls. Everything here felt plain compared to the great spires of her homeworld. The lights hummed, the air smelled faintly of metal, and the voices of humans echoed faintly from far away. They laughed so easily. They talked as if they feared nothing. To her, that was foolishness. In her world, laughter was rare and trust was dangerous. Here it was everywhere. She had been told to observe one human in particular. He was a soldier, a man who had fought in battles but lived now in quiet routine. She was meant to study him, to learn about human behavior. At first she thought this task was beneath her. What could such a man teach her? But each day she spent here, her curiosity grew. The first time she saw his room, she froze at the doorway. It was so different from the chambers of her people. Humans lived with little shields, little protection. His door was not even locked, only shut. Inside, his room was plain. Just a bed, a table, a few personal items. There were no weapons within reach, no armor at his side. He lived as if nothing could threaten him. That thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. One night, as she walked past, she paused again. The door was partly open, and inside she saw him asleep. The room was dark, but she could still see his form resting on the bed. He had no armor, no shields around him, nothing to guard his body. He lay there with the kind of peace her people never knew. She tilted her head, her thoughts racing. Among her kind, such weakness would be unthinkable. A warrior would never leave themselves so unguarded. To sleep like this would invite death, and yet he did it. Every night. Without fear. She found herself frozen at the doorway for far too long, her chest tight with questions she did not want to ask. Why did he trust the world enough to rest so openly? Why did he believe no harm would come to him? She thought to herself, half in scorn and half in confusion. I should have had mate with him while he was sleeping naked in his room. The thought startled her. It was not about desire, not truly. It was about the strangeness of his vulnerability, the strange pull of something she could not understand. For the first time, she wondered if his weakness was not weakness at all. She turned away quickly, her breath uneven, her mind restless. In her world, power meant walls, shields, and constant readiness. To her people, strength was shown by never letting one's guard fall. But here, in this small human room, strength seemed to mean something else. It meant trust. It meant the courage to rest even when danger might exist. The next morning, she saw him again. He greeted her with that same calm expression, as if the universe itself could not disturb him. His eyes met hers, steady and unafraid. She said nothing, but her mind kept circling the image of him asleep, unprotected. It was as if he had given himself to the mercy of the world, and yet the world had not taken him. That to her was more mysterious than any battle she had ever fought. That night she could not sleep. The image returned again and again. She tried to push it away, tried to remind herself that humans were weak, fragile, easy to break. But her heart whispered otherwise. Perhaps there was something hidden in their fragility, something stronger than armor and sharper than blades. Perhaps there was a lesson waiting for her in the very thing she had been ordered to despise. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her assigned quarters, her hands clenched tightly. Her punishment had been meant to humiliate her, to force her to learn humility. But what if it was doing something else? What if, in watching him, she began to change? She told herself it was impossible. She told herself she would never see humans as equals. But deep inside, a quiet voice was already whispering that she might be wrong. And it all began with the simple sight of a man who dared to sleep unafraid. The following day, She watched him more closely than ever before. He moved through the corridors of the human base with a calm rhythm, greeting others with small nods or easy words. To her eyes, every action felt careless. He carried no weapon at his side, wore no armor plates, and seemed blind to the dangers that might appear at any moment. And yet those around him trusted him. Other humans walked with him, laughed with him, and seemed comforted by his presence. She could not understand it. Among her kind, a warrior's worth was measured in fear, in the way others trembled when they entered a room. Here, this human was respected not through fear, but through something gentler, something quieter. At the meal hall, she sat at a corner table, observing silently. He sat with his group, listening more than speaking. He laughed at their stories, but she noticed something else. When someone grew quiet, when someone seemed troubled, his eyes always noticed. He leaned closer, asked questions, and made them speak again. His strength was not in showing dominance, but in giving space to others. That to her was strange. In her world, the powerful consumed all attention, demanded all voices bend to them. Here, the powerful man gave his voice away so others could feel stronger. Later, she confronted him. She caught him in the hallway, stepping out of his room. He looked at her with that same calm expression, as if he had expected her all along. "Why do you live without guards?" she asked bluntly. "Why do you sleep with no weapons near you? Do you not fear death?" He tilted his head, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. Then he gave a small smile, one that confused her even more. "Because not every day is a battlefield," he answered softly. "Not every night needs to be a fight. If I live like that, then I've already lost." His words struck her like a blow. In her mind, life was war. Every breath was a preparation for conflict. Her people taught that weakness meant destruction. But here was a man who embraced weakness as if it were strength. "You leave yourself exposed," she argued, her voice lower now, almost uncertain. "Anyone could walk in and end you while you sleep." "If that happens," he said simply, "then it happens. But if I spend every night in fear of it, then I've given up living." Rest is not weakness, it's trust. Sometimes you have to trust the world even if it doesn't deserve it. She stood in silence, unable to respond. His words made no sense, yet they carried a strange power. He was not lying, not trying to impress her. He truly believed what he said. To her warrior's mind, it was madness, and yet, part of her wanted to believe it too. That night, she found herself again near his door. She told herself it was only curiosity, that she was only fulfilling her duty of observation. But her heart betrayed her. She wanted to see if his calm words matched his actions. The door was closed, but not locked. Always not locked. She leaned against the wall across from it, listening to the quiet inside. No clinking of weapons, no shifting armor, just the sound of steady breathing. He slept again with the same peace, the same trust. She thought of her people who would never dare such a thing. Even in the safety of their cities, they slept in armor, with weapons close at hand. They called it vigilance. Now she wondered if it was fear. For the first time in her life, she wondered if her people had misunderstood strength. The thought unsettled her so much she could not sleep. She lay in her own quarters, staring into the dim light above, his words repeated in her head. Rest is not weakness, it's trust. The meaning twisted in her mind. Could trust itself be a weapon? Could openness be a form of strength greater than blades? She remembered his laughter in the hall, the way his eyes softened when others spoke, the way people around him leaned on his presence. He was no warlord, no commander crushing others under his will, yet he carried something invisible, something she could not name, and it made people follow him without fear. Her chest tightened as she admitted something dangerous. She was beginning to respect him. That feeling was the true punishment her rulers had designed for her. It was not about humiliation. It was about forcing her to see that what she had been taught might be wrong. The next morning, she avoided his eyes. She told herself she was only gathering information, that her feelings were irrelevant. But when he passed her in the corridor and gave her that same quiet nod of acknowledgement, her heart reacted faster than her mind. She felt a flicker of warmth, a spark of something unfamiliar. It scared her more than any battle ever had. She whispered to herself so softly no one could hear, "Why do you live without fear? And why does that make me afraid?" The days passed slowly, and yet for her every moment seemed sharper than before. She had lived through wars, seen empires rise and fall, but never had she felt this strange heaviness inside her chest. The human continued his quiet routines, training with others, eating in the hall, offering small smiles that seemed to warm the air around him. She told herself she was only observing, only doing her duty. But the truth was harder to ignore. Her eyes found him even when she did not mean to look. One evening she lingered outside again, unable to stop herself. His room door stood slightly open, as always. She had expected him to sleep by now, but instead she heard his voice, soft and low. She stepped closer, cautious, and realized he was speaking into a small human device. He was recording words, almost like a message to someone far away. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," he said quietly. "But if it's my last, I want someone to remember that I tried to live honestly. I didn't hide. I didn't spend my life in fear. If death comes, let it come. Until then, I'll keep laughing, keep fighting, keep trusting." She froze. Those words struck deeper than she expected. For her people, every day was a struggle for dominance, for survival. No one spoke of honesty or laughter or trust. They spoke only of victory. But here was a man who valued something beyond victory. He valued living itself. She turned away quickly, heart racing, ashamed that she had listened. But the words would not leave her mind. That night, as she lay on her bed, she whispered them to herself again and again, trying to understand why they unsettled her so deeply. The next day, she confronted him again, though her voice trembled more than before. "You speak of trust as if it were strength," she said. "But what if that trust is broken? What if someone betrays you? What then?" He looked at her calmly, as though he had already considered the question many times. "Then I'll survive it. Pain passes. Betrayal cuts deep, but it doesn't end me. What ends me is shutting the world out and never letting anyone in. I'd rather risk being hurt than live a life without connection." His words left her silent once more. She wanted to argue, wanted to crush his ideas with logic and the pride of her people, but no argument came. Instead, she felt something dangerous forming inside her: admiration. Later that evening, the base shook with a sudden alarm. Red lights flashed across the halls and the sound of running boots filled the air. She rushed out, her instincts sharpening. For a moment she felt alive again, like the warrior she had once been. Humans hurried to stations, grabbing weapons, readying defenses. She saw him among them, standing tall, giving orders, his voice calm even in chaos. Others looked to him, not their commanders, not their leaders. Him. When the raiders breached the outer wall, she expected fear, maybe even collapse. But what she saw was humans fighting side by side with a unity her people never knew. They covered each other, risked their lives for one another, shouted encouragement even in the storm of fire, and in the center of it all he fought with a raw will that shook her to the core. He was not the strongest, not the fastest, not even the most skilled. But when others faltered, he held them steady. When others bled, he carried them. When the line nearly broke, his voice pulled them back together. She fought too, her instincts driving her forward. But as she struck down enemies with her strength and skill, her eyes kept searching for him. And every time she found him, his defiance burned brighter than any blade. When the battle ended, the humans had driven the raiders away. Many were wounded, some were lost, but the base still stood. And in the quiet after the storm, she saw him again. He was sitting against a wall, blood on his arm, breathing heavily. Yet even wounded, he looked calm, almost at peace. A few of his comrades laughed softly beside him, and he laughed with them as though they had not nearly died. She stood in the shadows, unable to approach. Her chest ached with emotions she did not want to name. He should have been broken, afraid, shattered by the fight. But instead he laughed, he smiled, he breathed as if the battle had been nothing more than a storm passing by. That night, alone in her quarters, she whispered words she never thought she would say. Perhaps weakness is not weakness. Perhaps it is something else. Her hands trembled as she admitted the truth. She no longer saw him as fragile. She saw him as something her people had never been. Vulnerable yet unbroken, trusting yet unafraid. And against her will, that truth began to change her. The smell of smoke and metal still lingered in the air long after the raiders had been driven away. Broken walls were being repaired. Wounded soldiers were being carried to the medical wing, and silence hung heavy in the halls where laughter had once been. She walked slowly through the base, her sharp eyes taking in the aftermath. Her people were no strangers to war, but what unsettled her was not the damage itself. It was the way the humans faced it. They did not weep in despair, nor did they collapse into fear. They worked together, carrying rubble, patching walls, and checking on one another. Some were injured, yet they refused to rest until others were safe. To her, this was a strange kind of strength. On her world, the wounded were left behind, considered useless. Here, the wounded were carried forward, their voices still heard, their presence still valued. Her gaze kept drifting back to him. He sat on a bench near the medical wing, his arm wrapped in a rough bandage, blood still staining his uniform. A medic urged him to lie down, but he shook his head. Instead, he laughed softly with the soldiers who surrounded him, his presence steadying them even now. She approached him carefully, uncertain of her own purpose. Part of her wanted to thank him for what he had done, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. Another part wanted to question him again, to demand answers for what she could not understand. But when she stood before him, all she could do was look into his tired yet unbroken eyes. "You should be resting," she said finally, her voice low. "And waste a night like this?" he replied, smiling faintly. "We survived. That's reason enough to stay awake a little longer." His casual words unsettled her. She had seen him fight, seen him bleed, seen him stand in the middle of chaos without faltering, and yet he treated it as though it were nothing more than another day. "You laugh even after battle," she whispered, almost to herself. "Among my people there is no laughter after blood has been spilled." "Maybe that's why you fight so much," he said softly. "If you never laugh, if you never let yourself breathe, then war is the only thing left." She turned her head away, unable to answer. His words pierced her in ways no weapon ever had. She had always believed her people were the strongest, that their way of life was unshakable. But the longer she spent among humans, the more she saw cracks in her certainty. Later that night, the base quieted. Soldiers slept where they could, while engineers worked through the darkness to fix what was broken. She found herself wandering again, unable to rest. Her thoughts circled endlessly, her heart unsettled. Without meaning to, her steps carried her back to his door. It was open again, just slightly, as if inviting anyone to enter. She hesitated at the threshold, staring inside. He lay on his bed, finally asleep, his injured arm resting loosely at his side. His breathing was steady, his face calm. Despite the chaos of the day, despite the wounds he carried, he slept as though nothing could disturb him. Her chest tightened. She remembered her own words. "I should have had mate with him while he was sleeping naked in his room." At first it had been only a mocking thought, a way to dismiss his weakness. But now the memory of those words filled her with something else entirely. It was not desire, not conquest, but a strange, painful longing. She envied his peace, envied his trust in a universe she had only ever feared. She stepped back, afraid of her own feelings, and returned to her quarters. Sleep did not come. Instead, she sat in the dark, remembering the battle. She had fought with strength, had slain more enemies than most. But when the soldiers spoke afterward, they spoke not of her, but of him. It was his voice they remembered, his courage they followed. He had no scales, no unnatural power, yet he carried something her people had never mastered. She wondered what her rulers would say if she told them the truth. They would call her weak, corrupted by human softness. They would say she had failed her punishment, that she had let herself be swayed by creatures unworthy of respect. But deep inside, she knew it was not softness she had seen. It was something else, something harder to name. The next morning, she found him already awake, walking slowly through the base despite his injuries. He greeted others with quiet words, asked about their wounds, and even carried supplies with his good arm. She followed at a distance, watching silently. Her people would have ordered the weak to stand aside, but he chose to help anyway. When he noticed her shadowing him, he stopped and turned, his eyes calm. "You don't have to watch me all the time," he said gently. "I am not watching," she replied quickly, though her voice betrayed her. He gave her a faint smile. "Then maybe you're learning." She wanted to deny it, to shut the door on the possibility. "Boo!" His words lingered long after he walked away. She hated how true they felt. For the first time in her life, she was beginning to learn not from her people, but from the very species she had been taught to despise. And she did not know if that made her weaker or stronger. The days after the battle carried a strange silence. Repairs continued. The halls echoed with hammering and voices, but beneath it all was a weight no one spoke of. The humans had survived, but at a cost. Empty beds reminded everyone of those who would not return. She had seen loss many times before, but never had it unsettled her like this. On her world, the fallen were quickly forgotten, their names erased to make way for the strong. Here their names were whispered, remembered, carried in the voices of those left behind. She watched him most of all. His wounds were healing, though slowly, yet he moved as if he could not afford to stop. He spoke to the grieving, offered comfort in quiet tones, and joined the workers even when his body clearly protested. She did not understand why he carried so much weight that was not his to bear. It seemed foolish, almost reckless. But each time he reached out to someone, each time he listened, she saw the way their shoulders straightened, the way their eyes cleared. Somehow his presence lessened their pain. One evening she found him alone at the edge of the base. He stood looking at the horizon, where the sky burned with the light of a distant sun. His posture was calm, yet there was a heaviness in the way his shoulders slumped. For a moment she only watched, trying to read him as she might read an enemy on the battlefield. But he was not an enemy, and that confused her more than anything else. "You lost much," she said finally, her voice quiet. He did not turn at once. He kept his gaze on the horizon before answering. "Yes, but we carry them forward. Their lives don't end with their death. They live in the choices we make next." She frowned, unsettled. "How can you believe that? They are gone. Their bodies are ash. How can they live on?" He finally looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because memory is stronger than flesh. Because love does not vanish. You think strength is only in muscle, in armor, in survival. But true strength is in remembering and refusing to let those we lost become nothing." His words struck her again. For her people, the dead were discarded like broken weapons. But here the dead were honored, kept alive through memory. She could not decide if it was weakness or something far greater. The following night she could not sleep. The echo of his words filled her mind. She paced her quarters, restless, her chest tight with emotions she had no name for. At last she rose and walked the dark corridor. Once more she found herself outside his door. The room was lit dimly, and she saw him awake this time, sitting on the edge of his bed. His injured arm was bare, wrapped in bandages, his head bowed slightly. He seemed deep in thought, not noticing her at first. When he finally raised his eyes and saw her, he did not speak. He only gestured quietly for her to come inside. She hesitated, then stepped across the threshold. The room was simple, as always, too simple for a warrior's chamber. She looked around, then at him, searching for the right words. None came. "You are different from us," she said at last, her voice low. "My people would never fight as you fight. They would never trust as you trust. Even now I cannot understand it." He studied her for a moment, then asked, "And does it frighten you? Or does it make you curious?" Her breath caught. No one had ever asked her that. Her people did not care about feelings. They cared only about loyalty, strength, obedience. To admit fear or curiosity was dangerous, but here in this quiet room she found herself whispering the truth. "Both," she said. A faint smile touched his lips. "Good. Fear keeps us cautious. Curiosity keeps us alive." She lowered her gaze, her thoughts tangled. For so long she had believed her punishment was only humiliation, a lesson in obedience. But now it felt like something else. It felt like a door had been forced open inside her, one she could not close again. As the silence stretched between them, she remembered her first thought when she had seen him asleep. I should have had mate with him while he was sleeping naked in his room. She felt the heat of shame at the memory now. It had been the thought of a warrior mocking weakness, but now she understood it differently. What she had wanted without realizing it was to understand his vulnerability, to hold it in her hands and see why it did not break him. He looked at her quietly, as though he sensed the war raging inside her. "You don't have to understand everything now," he said gently. "Sometimes it's enough just to be here." For a long moment she said nothing. She only stood there, feeling the strange pull of something she had no word for. Perhaps it was respect. Perhaps it was something deeper. All she knew was that her world had begun to change, and it had begun with him. The base felt different in the days that followed. The walls were patched, the corridors alive with movement again. But beneath the daily routine there was something unspoken. She could feel it like a quiet current in the air. The humans were still healing, but they carried themselves with a strange lightness. Even after loss, they stood taller, as if their pain had given them more reason to live. She could not stop wondering how such fragile beings could grow stronger through grief. She kept close to him, though she never admitted why. She told herself it was part of her duty, that she needed to keep observing his actions. But the truth pressed heavier on her chest each day. It was not duty that pulled her near him. It was the way he looked at others, the way he carried wounds without complaint, the way he seemed to choose life even when death had brushed against him. One evening, she found him outside again, standing near the edge of the landing platform. The stars stretched endlessly above them, scattered like shards of silver across the black. He stood with his hands resting loosely at his sides, his gaze lost in the distance. She stepped beside him, silent at first. Together they looked out at the endless night. After a long while she spoke. "My people do not look at the stars like this," she admitted. "We look at them only as territory to conquer. Another battlefield. Another place to claim." He turned his head slightly, his expression calm. "And what do you see now?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to say she saw the same as before, but it was not true. For the first time, she saw more than battlegrounds. She saw possibilities. She saw life scattered in every direction, each star a place where something could grow. "I don't know," she whispered finally. He gave a small nod, as if that answer was enough. "Then maybe that's the start." They stood in silence again, but it was not an empty silence. It was filled with something heavy yet comforting. She glanced at him, and once more the thought returned unbidden. I should have had mate with him while he was sleeping naked in his room. But it no longer carried mockery. It no longer carried confusion. Now it felt like a confession of something she did not know how to name. She wanted to be near the part of him that trusted the universe so completely. She wanted to understand what it meant to be vulnerable yet unafraid. The following night, alarms sounded again. Not raiders this time. Scouts reported a larger enemy fleet approaching. Her blood quickened. She had fought many battles, and she knew the sound of coming death. But the humans did not crumble in fear. Instead, they gathered with quiet determination, readying defenses, standing shoulder to shoulder. She found him at the center of it all once more, giving orders calmly, steadying the others with his voice. She stepped closer. "This battle will be worse," she told him. "We may not survive." "Then we fight anyway," he said simply. Her chest tightened at his words. Among her kind, such certainty would sound foolish. But here it sounded like truth. They fought not because survival was guaranteed, but because life was worth defending even when the odds were hopeless. When the enemy finally arrived, the night sky lit with fire. Ships clashed above, weapons thundered below. She fought with all the strength of her training, but her eyes sought him constantly. And every time she found him, he was still there, holding the line, his body moving with determination that seemed to grow stronger with each strike. At one point, the enemy broke through near the command post. She saw him surrounded, his weapon nearly out of charge. Without thinking, she leapt into the chaos, cutting down attackers with the force of her kind. She stood at his side, her heart burning, her blade moving faster than it ever had before. For the first time, she was not fighting for victory nor for duty. She was fighting because he was there, because she could not let him fall. When the battle ended, the ground was littered with smoke and silence. The humans had endured once more, though at great cost. She stood breathing heavily, her body aching, her weapon dripping with the blood of enemies. Beside her, he leaned on the wall, wounded but alive. He looked at her, eyes steady even through pain. "You didn't have to come," he said softly. "Yes," she answered quickly, her voice sharper than she meant. "I did." Their eyes held, and in that moment something passed between them. Something wordless, something deeper than logic. She realized then that her punishment had already failed. She was no longer only an observer. She was no longer untouched by humanity. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, when she returned to her quarters, she could not close her eyes. The image of him, bloodied but smiling, filled her mind. For the first time in her life, she was afraid not of death, but of what it would mean to lose him. The dawn after the battle rose heavy and quiet. Smoke still curled into the sky, drifting lazily over broken walls and scorched earth. The base had survived, but the cost was etched into every stone, every tired face. Humans walked slowly among the ruins, carrying the wounded, honoring the fallen, patching what they could. There was grief everywhere, but also something else, a quiet strength, like a flame that refused to be put out. She moved through the base, her steps slow, her eyes catching details that only days ago she would not have noticed. A young human soldier bent to help another walk, even though his own leg shook under the strain. An older mechanic, face streaked with soot, worked tirelessly to repair broken systems while refusing to rest. Children, frightened but brave, carried water to the survivors. It struck her again and again these people would not surrender, not to despair, not even to the universe itself. She found him in the medical bay, sitting upright though his shoulder was wrapped in bandages. He looked tired but calm, speaking softly to the medic as if his wound meant nothing compared to those lying unconscious on nearby beds. When she entered, his eyes flicked toward her, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade. "You're still standing," she said quietly. "Barely," he admitted with a faint smile. "But standing is enough." She moved closer, her gaze lingering on his injuries. She wanted to scold him, to tell him he had taken too many risks, that his body was too fragile to endure what he forced it through. But the words did not come. Instead, she felt an ache she could not name, a heaviness that made her chest burn. For a long while, she simply sat near him, watching the humans around them. Each moment she stayed, the truth grew clearer. She had been sent here as punishment, stripped of honor, forced to walk among those her people mocked as weak. But now, after everything, she no longer saw weakness. She saw something far more dangerous than power. Resilience. A strength that came not from armor or advanced bloodlines, but from the choice to keep moving forward when everything tried to push them down. Later that evening, the humans gathered outside, a small ceremony for the ones they had lost. Torches flickered in the dusk and voices rose together in song, low, heavy, and filled with sorrow, yet carrying a thread of hope. She stood among them, silent but listening, her chest tightening with every note. Her people had songs of war, chants of victory, cold speeches of command. But this was different. It was grief made beautiful, pain carried together so it became lighter. She realized she was standing not among soldiers but among a family, one that stretched across bloodlines, across weakness and strength, across everything. She thought of her own people. If she returned now and told them what she had seen, what she had felt, they would laugh. They would call it weakness, softness, corruption, but deep down she knew the truth. Humanity's strength was not something her kind could ever understand until they allowed themselves to feel. And perhaps one day they would. When the ceremony ended, she found him once more at the edge of the platform, the stars hanging heavy above them. He leaned against the railing, his posture tired but unbroken. She stepped beside him, her voice low. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you?" she asked. He glanced at her, one brow raised. "Can't say I do," she exhaled slowly. "I thought you were careless, sleeping without protection, living without armor. I thought it was foolish. I even told myself, I should have had mate with you while you were sleeping naked in your room, just to prove how defenseless you were." His smile was faint, touched with curiosity, but he did not interrupt. "But I was wrong," she continued, her voice quieter now. "You were not weak. You were brave in a way my people cannot understand. You trusted the universe. You trusted those around you. You let yourself be unguarded, not because you lacked strength, but because you had more of it than anyone I have ever met. And now," she paused, her throat tight, "now I think I envy you." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then he spoke, his words simple, steady. "It's not about envy. It's about choice. You can choose it too." Her heart thudded in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she could carry this lesson with her, that she could live unguarded, that she could choose connection instead of walls. They stood there together in silence once more. The stars above, the ruins below, the future unwritten. She knew she would return to her people eventually, because that was the law. But she also knew she would never be the same. The punishment that was meant to break her had instead remade her. She would carry humanity's fire within her, whether her people understood it or not. For now, though, she did not think of her return. For now, she only stood beside him, watching the endless sky, feeling for the first time in her life not like a prisoner, but like someone who had finally been set free.